Hi, everyone, and welcome to the show. And today we're, of course, having a Monday evening chat with our guest and expert, Abhijit Iyer Mitra, who is, of course, very well known to all of you here, finally in his own avatar. I don't know how long, but that means this is serious, folks. So let's get right to it. Abhijit, before we start on this chopper crash, which we found out ironically during the Sunday Club, and we were not sure what was going on at that time, but it's a very significant event in Iran, as can be expected. But can you explain to us the power hierarchy in Iran? The supreme leader, the president, how does it all work? The Revolutionary Guard, what is the power matrix?
So basically, everything there is made deliberately coup-proof. Okay, so you have the military, but then you have the IRGC, which is there to essentially be a second military. So if one tries the coup, the other has enough to control the other. Okay, then of course you have a sort of a kind of military intelligence which reports to the Guardians Council, so that it is compliant, so that the military itself, I mean, you forget the IRGC, the military itself should be compliant and loyal to the orders of the hierarchy out there. The second is the civilian control. Now, civilian control, how it happens is, it's basically the closest you have are these Calcutta clubs, where each road basically has its own club, and those club members, they keep tabs on everybody, who they're voting for, what they've said, etc., etc., so they know exactly who to bring out to vote and who to tell the goons to not come out to vote and things, not allow out to vote. What happens out here is, if you want to have any prospects in public life, you have to come out for state sponsored demonstrations and things like that and work your way up the chain. Okay. Now, it's not as ominous as it sounds, because this guy is kind of your local he's your local mullah, but he's also your local counselor and everything. He will equally deal with, prostitution out there. So prostitution is totally legal in Iran. It
It is?
just
Okay.
it goes under temporary marriage. So here you rent rooms by the hour, there you rent marriages by the hour. Okay. So if this is a guy you can go to get your whore by the hour, then this is certainly a guy you can talk to. They're very frank discussions that happen. We also need to remember that Iranian police are actually not feared by the Iranians. They actually trust their police enough to go to the police with their problems and things like that. And family courts tend to be very sympathetic. Okay, they are, in fact, even more sympathetic, I would say, than Indian courts are. And it's certainly not as bogged down as Indian courts are. Now, this is the civilian side of things. Then you have the political side of things. Now, you have parliament, you have the supreme leader, you have the expediency council and the guardians council. Okay, now I've forgotten the exact this one, but one of them basically decides who. I think it's the expediency council that decides who the guardians will be, and the guardians approve who can run for president and things like that. But basically, it's a complete check and balance. Your parliament does not have the kind of powers that the expediency and the guardians council do, right?
So
And
they
they
can,
will
when you say that AIM, you mean that they can overrule anything that the parliament comes up with?
basically, yes. They can also decide who to disqualify for president. So if they don't like a guy who's running for president, which is why you've never really had, when you hear these BBC, CNN, all these people say the reformist presidential candidate so and so is running, you're sitting and going, dude, this guy was part of Khomeini's regime going on, and it isn't just Raisi. Rouhani, who was this great Rouhani and Khatami, who were great reformist presidents, they all signed death warrants themselves during the Islamic Revolution. There was this particularly nasty little fellow called Ayatollah Kholkholi. Uh, his name was something else, but they used to call him Kholkholi because he was called the Mad Mullah of Tehran. He used to literally giggle while sentencing people to death. Right. I'm going to show you his image. His daughter, uh, who is a friend of a friend, turned out to be a lesbian, and a very butch lesbian living in America these days. But let me show
Isn't
you.
it
I have,
wonderful how life turns out so well for the offspring of these butchers and despots and all these people?
है ना? Kolkholi.
Mm.
I have Kolkholi. So let me show you this. This is so he was the guy who sentenced the most number of people to death. And there was absolutely this guy, right? Sadeh
Mm.
Khalkhali. But they used to call him Kolkholi because Kolkholi means mad. Like, kind of like,
Mm.
yeah. This was the guy.
Mm.
Like, Khatami is ethnically Azeri, and this guy is
Mm.
also ethnically Azeri. Hmm.
He looks
And
young.
well, this is a young picture. He died
Is he
quite
still
old.
alive or he's done?
No, no, he's done. He died long back.
Okay.
Sadiq, let me just.
Khil. Ah.
If you look at his later images, I'm sure that, yeah, see, there you go. This was
Mm.
him.
Oh boy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
That's
So
the other thing, right? They live to a really ripe old age as well.
yeah,
After
yeah, they
salvaging
lived for old
all
ages
these
and
death
things like that.
warrants and everything. Yeah.
Uh,
So the supreme
so
leader is the ultimate authority. And because some of the news reports are saying that the president is not that powerful, it's more like a symbolic
so
position.
the president is entirely naam ke vaste. Because understand, this is also innovation within. Because in Islam, you've always had this concept ki, how can the word of God be overruled by a man? Now, is that an argument for a dictatorship, in which case arguing against the Shah or the Sultan is treason? It's against the laws of God. So, the innovation that the Iranian Revolution came up with was there will be elections, sure. The elections to the secular authority will be there, but the imamate will run the religious authority, which will fundamentally need to have more power over the secular authority. Right? So they even determine who is going to run for a presidential election. So unless you're in your good books, you can't even be the opposition candidate. You can't even run for parliament.
Mm, mm,
You understand?
mm,
Which is why, even though it's not a uni-party state like, say, China, in China has elections. People don't realize this. China has elections, except you only vote for one guy. So what's the point of voting?
well, that's easy. Yeah.
Here you have the ruse of voting for many people, and it's like voting for it's literally like a choice between Stalin or Lenin. Who are you going to choose?
Mm,
Uh,
mm,
and in that context, Lenin is a reformist candidate and Stalin is not.
mm.
So you have to take these pinches of reformist and all this nonsense with a great, great, great pinch of salt.
The sack of soil, salt,
A
really.
sack of salt, a bucket full of salt. Okay? So this
Yeah.
is what happens out there. That said, we also need to remember Indians seem to live in this la la land that somehow India can teach Iran certain things. Iran is a far, far more advanced country than we are. They are much more in there, even today, they are much more industrialized than we are. Their urban life is much more Western in that sense. Now, I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing, but it's more Western than India is. If you go up to the northern hilly neighborhoods of Tajrish and Shemiran and places like that, they make Switzerland look bad. They're like insanely rich and very nice. There's a lot to be said for modern Iranian aesthetics, which I don't like, but that's a different matter. Okay. The problem also is because there's not too many jobs and things happening. There's a chronic drug problem in the cities of Iran. And even with the cities, you notice, places like Isfahan or Tehran or Mashhad especially, are extremely westernized, the urban culture out there. But then you have equally big cities like Shiraz or Qum, not equally big, but
Mm,
big cities like Shiraz or Qum, which are still extremely rural, conservative, and religious in their outlook. Right? The thing that we don't discuss out here is that when the Shah tried to modernize Iran, he was going, he's making the same mistake that all these people, they tweet out photos of Afghanistan university, Kabul university, with women going there in short skirts, or Tehran university with women driving around in short skirts. That was a minuscule percentage of the population. Most of the population remained extremely conservative and religious. Okay. So this is one of those things where we tend to get Iran horribly, horribly wrong. And when you read Western narratives about Iran not having freedom, not having that, that's such total bullshit, man. You go to Iran, you will not get a sense of dictatorship unless you start talking about politics. If you're making political statements, yes. Otherwise,
But
you are.
the hijab thing. I
Yeah.
mean, I have to say, I watched, like to watch vlogs from Iran and other countries, and I saw a lot of women in normal life not covering their head in like
So,
vlogs, and there were women who had their heads covered as well.
so it's, you just need to cover your head, money idhar tak covering ho jata hai. You can show a lot of hair in front, you can show a bit of neck and things like that. It really
I'm
depends.
saying I saw lots without it, completely
it's
without it. Yeah.
it's a bit scary. I mean, you can do it inside your house. Inside your house, you can do whatever you want. You can walk around naked.
No, they were on the metro. They were in markets, and I was
Well,
kind
I
of
won't
surprised.
do that. I mean,
And
it's really not worth the risk.
it's like a year ago or something.
Yeah, well, that
So I
that
was
was
confused.
during the Masa Amini protests. Different thing, but generally, it's best not to try that kind of thing out. Okay? But you can do very minimal, like a dupatta on the head, like a lot of Indian politicians wear also. Ghungat dupatta, Rajasthani style. This thing, wo bhi chalega. See, Suhail says Advaita should move to Saudi. I totally agree. Yes, I totally agree, Suhail. She should.
Why are you paying attention to him? He's obviously experiencing FOMO. Let him
Yeah.
experience FOMO.
Remember, today, Saudi Arabia has not only gotten rid of the hijab, you can literally go around, women can go around in sweatpants, in short skirts. There'll be social judging, but there's no more religious judging. You certainly
Yeah.
can't be punished for it.
Yeah.
Okay?
And after what GoDaddy's done to me, I'm open to marrying a sheikh. I think I need a sheikh.
Excellent. We all need a
Yeah.
sheikh.
We all.
Now, yeah, I also need a sheikh. And the number of sheikhs who actually swing my way is fantastic. Now, so this is the background. Now, understand why the friction comes out here is because there have been these Republican movements throughout the Middle East. In Egypt, you had the Nasserist movement, which was essentially overthrowing monarchies and replacing them with republics. But the problem with those republics was that the ulema found them very scary, which is why the Muslim Brotherhood comes about. They found both the monarchy corrupt and the republics which were trying to move away from Islam. They didn't actually, but maybe they went Islamic enough for the Muslim Brotherhood. People like Hassan al-Banna and Sayyid Qutb and things like that. They didn't want republicanism. They fundamentally wanted an Iranian style system. So, it's very curious that the Iranian revolution is actually the perfect state of affairs that the Muslim Brotherhood. Look, we're discussing a serious issue. Can you please get rid of all these frivolous comments? Thanks. Uh, so, the Iranian Islamic Revolution, quote unquote, is essentially the realization of what, curiously enough, Hassan al-Banna and Sayyid Qutb thought of, but they did not think of a republic. The innovation out here is the way in which Islamic principles have been melded with modern democratic principles. I mean, they're not democratic as we understand them, of course, right? And this is why the Saudis and co find it so threatening as well, and lots of other countries find it threatening. Okay, now this is the background. Now let's come to the crash. What do you want to know about the crash? I can't hear you.
Okay, let's get to Raisi. He is obviously someone, some reports are saying that he was tipped to take over from Khamenei. And he was one of the picks. And the next supreme leader, so it's alleged. So, despite the fact that in his present position, he's maybe titular and not that effective, but in the future, there was a probability that he was going to be front and center. Is that true?
Uh, See, we don't know. There are many people who were tipped for that role. Former President Rafsanjani was tipped for that role at one point of time. But the thing was, he was completely removed from favor. He came from, remember, all of these people are extremely rich and extremely corrupt. Khamenei's family is very rich. Nobody wants to talk about it, but they're very rich. Rafsanjani was known as the Pista King. His family had a complete monopoly over all pistachio production in Iran. Okay. Uh, all of them are insanely rich. And most of their kids who live in the same Tajrish and Shemiran neighborhoods drive around in Lambos and Ferraris and things like that and smoke up cocaine and hashish and what have you almost every day. So, what ends up happening is that you never really know who the next successor is going to be. In the Indian context, think of Khamenei as Mayavati. Anybody who tried to posit themselves as Mayawati's successor was removed, and finally everybody thought that the nephew was the final this thing, but he also got removed. Okay, so never till it happens, I'm not willing to accept that it will happen.
Yeah, because that's
Uh,
what happened with Khomeini. Khomeini had another favorite in mind, and then that guy fell out of favor, and he brought in Khomeini, who wasn't a cleric, and then
and
they
the
had
other
to
guy, whose
replace
name I forget, was kept in house arrest for the rest of his
natural life.
life, even though he
Yeah.
was more senior to Khomeini in the scheme of things. He was a grand Ayatollah. He wasn't just an Ayatollah. Hmm. Sistani. Ayatollah Sistani. That was the one. Let me just confirm. No, that isn't the one. Uh, yeah, no, he isn't the one. Yortha. I forget
It
who
was
it was.
something with an R, if I recall. I'll just tell you.
Anyway, he was senior to Khomeini, but no, it was Khamenei who was settled upon. Now,
Yeah. Right.
Khamenei, remember, has a great reason for being personally very bitter towards all reformist movements. If you notice, is it his right hand or left hand that is always in? He looks like he's got polio in one hand, right? That isn't polio. That's actually one hand that was permanently injured in a bomb blast that killed Beheshti
Yeah.
and people like that. It was the University of Tehran, I think it was that particular
Yeah.
bomb blast.
Yeah.
And
It was
it
a tape
killed,
recorder, I think, that went off next
yeah,
to
it was a
him, right?
tape
Tape
recorder that
recorder.
went off and it killed a lot of people on stage. And that was this thing. Yes, I know Sistani was in Iraq. Please find out the name of the guy,
I'll just tell
SSG.
you the name. I'll find out the name of
Find
the
out
guy.
the name of the guy, please, huh? Who was meant to replace. So, Khomeini himself led a lot of people to believe that they were going to be successors and purged them. When Rafsanjani initially came, Rafsanjani, because he sat on the Guardian Council as well, thought that the normal rules did not apply to him. He could not be arm twisted and he could get away with being more than just a nominal president. But that wasn't the case because Khamenei ultimately put him in his place. It took 10, 12 years to put him in his place, but Rafsanjani was put in his place and removed from all roles and effectively disgraced. He died in disgrace. Okay? So Khamenei, whoever the successor comes, uh, we will
His name
never
was
till
Ayatollah Montazeri.
Montazeri. Yes, okay.
Hmm.
Was it? Let me. Yes, I think it was. But
Ayatollah Montazeri, Montazeri.
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, that was it. He
He
was
was a
demoted.
pupil of Demise,
Yeah, yeah,
and was, yeah.
yeah, and he died in house arrest. Basically, correct. That's the one. Montazeri. Okay. So it's so people who sit around now. Let's also go into protests because it's very important our viewers understand what these protests are. Now, most of these protests, every time, guys, when you see reformist candidate is losing election and people are coming out and protesting, it's fake protests. Well, it's not fake protests, it's limited protests. It's special interest protests. And the guy isn't really a reformist at all. Okay. Um, the only real protest that happened, I think, was it the 2013, 2014 protests when prices went up exponentially, where actual people started coming out on the streets. Okay, those were serious protesters. That was the one protest that actually rocked it, because remember, the reformists and the hardliners came together to crush those protests because they realized that it was going to uh, um, destroy the
Destabilize
power.
them. Yeah, the
I
power
will tell
sector.
you right now, for anybody who has a notion that a protest can succeed in Iran, or that the government can be changed in Iran outside of external intervention, I really don't see how the hell that's possible. Because, like I said, everything, there is check and balances on everyone. If the next supreme leader, the follow up of Khamenei, decides to do a Gorbachev and decides to do perestroika and glasnost and open up Iran and things like that and institute reforms, the Guardian Council will not allow it. The Guardian Council has the power to remove him. Either the Guardian or the Expediency Council. I don't know which one. But one of them has the power to remove him. They do. There's nothing you
Hmm.
can do about it. Right?
Hmm.
Uh, so there is no way that hardline clique, which is incentivized, it's democratic corruption, because the goodies, most of the businesses are run by the IRGC. Like Pakistan is a military business system where the military runs 90% of the country. Here it's not 90% of the country, but it's almost 90% of the country, because
Hmm.
everything to run smoothly needs to have a link with the government somehow or the other.
So now,
Some
AIM. Let's move to the core topic now, which is obviously this helicopter crash, Raisi's death. There have been a lot of video footage of mornings and things of that sort. Yesterday, of course, there was mixed reports on the fact that some people said that they had made contact with some of the people on the plane, on the chopper, which eventually turned out to be untrue. But here's the weird part: there were three choppers that were part of the convoy, so to speak. The other two landed safely. This one being the most important one because it had the president and the foreign minister as well as the mayor of East Azerbaijan province in Iran. That's the one that went down. What do you make of that?
So I'm not surprised, but remember, helicopters don't. When you say helicopter convoy, they don't fly like during the Republic Day fly past. We need to remember this. That's a huge safety hazard. It's only done for fly pasts. Otherwise, an air convoy, you stay about 2-3 kilometers away from each other just to prevent any accident from happening. Which is why, even in aircraft landings, you maintain almost a 5 to 10 kilometer distance, depending. I think it's about 10 kilometer distance at commercial airports. I know it looks very close, but it takes almost 3 minutes for the next plane to land after the first plane has landed, and that's about a 10 kilometer distance that gets covered. So air crashes, this convoy, three helicopters flying together, is not like bikers biking together and things like that. They maintain several kilometers of distance, number one. Precisely because of that, each one of them will be following a different flight path. In flight, you don't follow in a straight line one behind the other. You're flying at different altitudes, different vectors and things like that. So each helicopter will take a slightly different path. Okay. The moment I heard that this had gone down, you pretty much knew they were dead. And I'll tell you why. Because there is always one of the things that every helicopter provided with is emergency comms equipment and signal equipment, flares and things like that, to send out messages that you're alive and where to come and rescue you, signals, etc., things like that. Active signals, and the passive one is the transponder. The transponder went off, but there's always active equipment around to signal. In this case, the very fact that nobody was issuing those signals meant that there was no, either they were all dead or they were too badly injured to count for anything. That kind of terrain and that kind of weather is exactly where the maximum number of helicopter losses happen. Now, helicopters, remember, Rawat's helicopter, General Rawat's helicopter went down under very similar circumstances. It was unclear weather. Uh, uh, yeah, and it was hilly terrain. Y.S. Reddy, Jagan Reddy's dad, went down under very similar circumstances. Bad
Kobe
weather
Bryant, so na?
near the Tirupati Hills, Tirumala Hills. Huh?
No,
Kobe
Kobe
Bryant.
Bryant.
Yeah,
Very
yeah, he
similar.
was exact same thing, right? Now, if you look at this helicopter, there are military helicopters that have extremely specialized equipment to fly blind. But in order to fly blind at low altitude, that technology is still not cleared for civil use. We need to remember this. So it is only kept on military helicopters. It does not percolate down. So, for example, 90% of the stuff that a pilot has to do while landing, maintaining air traffic control, circling rules, and things like that, they're almost not required in a military environment. They can literally coordinate silently without ever talking to each other. They can coordinate silently amongst each other who's going to land when. The radar is powerful enough to pick up who's coming onto the runway and things like that. It is still done as a matter of protocol so that civil and military protocols remain the same. Okay, and that military technology is considered too classified to migrate onto civil tech. Now, what happened in this case is we know there was at least one piece of military equipment that was put onto this. This is some kind of either a comms or a navigation system. Most possibly, it's a navigation system. It could also have been a jammer because there's several jammers that look like this. I tweeted out that image. If you could bring up my tweet about it. 1 second, let me just check.
I'll do it. I'll do it. You keep talking.
Huh. And no, it'll be easier if I show you ki kya hua
Okay.
karke. So which is why okay. Now let me just go to this. Let me get this out.
It was also a very old chopper, right? It was a Bell chopper.
So everything in Iran is very old. We need to remember this because they have been denied, except for about 4 or 5 planes that they got when the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, was signed. They have extremely old, antiquated equipment because they have not. The sanctions were so thorough and complete. You were not even allowed to share any kind of engines, old engines, replacement engines. So they had to keep cannibalizing and things like that, right?
But we hear
And
so much about a black market in the arms industry. If they
yeah,
are
but
that
see,
rich,
see,
can't they buy?
black markets don't operate with large things. Black market only operates with small things. समझ रहे हो ना? So small parts you can get. Big parts like a whole aircraft engine almost impossible to get. ठीक है ना? Now you see this piece of equipment. Can you see?
Yeah, I'll put it full screen. Got it. Yeah.
Yeah. So this piece of equipment that I've highlighted, if you can see, that was, we still don't know what it is. It could be an emergency comms system. It could actually be a navigation system because if you look, it's got two black tips, one smaller one here and one bigger one here. Yeah.
Is this a
And those,
photograph of this chopper that was in the crash, or is
it's
it
the
just a
exact
generic?
same- it's the exact same chopper that crashed.
Okay. Okay.
Hmm.
Got it.
Now,
Yeah.
it's an old chopper. It's not equipped with the kind of equipment because head of state aircraft then get classified military technology to put on them. So Modi's 777-300 ER that he flies in will have extremely advanced equipment on it. The Mi-17 that he takes will have extremely advanced, even in blind flight like that, it will be able to see mountains and avoid them and things like that. That is not technology authorized for civil use, and it was not technology that Iran could have gotten easily. They basically relied on a lot of things to get over these sanctions and so on and so forth. And this is a classic case of some kind of upgrading, but not a full head of state upgrading going on. And that's why the thing crashed. Because if you look at the angle of the crash, it doesn't seem, it's a very strange angle of crash. It doesn't seem like it hit and crashed. It's more like it stopped and then fell on the mountain and broke up into pieces. So it's clearly some kind of engine failure or something that happened. So it might not have even slammed in.
But
Okay.
then that makes it a little suspicious, right? I
No,
mean,
not
how can the engine just stop?
helicopters crash. The helicopters crash. Planes crash. There's at least 2, 3 plane crashes every year, and nobody, no terrorist is actually doing it. Right. Um,
Now, Israel has come out very proactively and said that we had nothing to do with this. They issued a
they
clarification.
probably wouldn't. See, they probably wouldn't, because remember, uh, it's one of those things where it suits them perfectly well for Raisi to stay in power, and for Raisi to actually get a sense of being bigger and things like that, so that you can, you know, play on divisions within the government.
And the other thing is, of course, since we're going down that path, the one thing that's coming up is that Khamenei's son Mujatib, I think, is the one because he has four sons, was tipped to be the next president. Any, do you know? Have you heard anything about that? So
Uh,
personal interest.
Look, the Guardians Council would never allow that. And if he ever became president, he would know that the Guardians Council would be out to get him. Because the one thing that they do not tolerate is political nepotism. You can do nepotism in anything. His grandson, great grandson can be the biggest industrialist in Iran, etc., etc. But you can't do nepotism within the system. It's very curiously. Now, it's again, these are the fascinating things that happen between the Sunnis and the Shia. In the Sunnis, there is this concept called ijtihad, which derives from jihad. But that this is the internal jihad, where every Sunni has the right to read the Quran and interpret it for himself. So he does not need a teacher or an intermediary to do it. He has complete freedom after he has initially learned the Quran to come up with whatever interpretation he sees fit to suit him. Okay. In Shiism, they consider that extremely dangerous, rightfully so, because an untrained person can not weigh in the complete jurisprudence and things like that and mix and match. So they consider it extremely dangerous, which is why you have this sort of like here you have an Ishta Devata, there you have an Ishta Ayatollah. You go towards the Ayatollah who uh, most speaks to you spiritually, and you learn from him on how to interpret and things like that. You do not interpret, it is left up to the Ayatollah and the hierarchy, the clerical hierarchy there to interpret. And even there's an appellate system, because higher up you go, uh, if you disagree with what your local mullah says, you can go up the appellate chain. Okay. So it's even that is a very and they came up with it very specifically. You know why? Because there was a bunch called the Kharijites, who are today the most peaceful branch of Islam in Oman, who were at one point the most radical branch in Islam. They killed Ali because he gave kharij. Usne istefa de diya, resignation kar diya of his caliphate. They killed him because they said it wasn't his to give up. God had made him the caliph. He had no business to give up what God had given him. And he could not even negotiate. He should not have even negotiated with Muwayya to give up all of this. Okay. So the Kharijites, because of that, they developed this system where the Imam has to give assent to any interpretation, and there is a whole interpretational chain. It is not so. It's very curious, right? It's a democratized Islamic republic, quasi democratized, but it's a de-democratized interpretational primacy. It's it's tough. I mean, this is
The
why I
way
call it
you're
Western.
explaining it, it seems like the way you're explaining it and sitting on the outside, it seems like this is a better way to interpret, to have some consistency in interpretation, as
Yeah.
opposed to, the kind of,
And they're very
interpretation that we see
consistent.
of groups like
They're very
ISIS and people
consistent
like that.
in their interpretation till it gets up to the supreme leader level. Because at the supreme leader level, you can be very inconsistent. Montazeri, for example, turned around and asked Khomeini, uh, well, you were the one that were advocating for these freedoms. If this is what we promised the people, we have to give it to them, or Allah will curse us for it. And Khomeini didn't like it, and that was the reason that Montazeri was put under house arrest, because he was very avuncular. He's like, you can't go around killing people like this. You can't go around, even Islamic law. There are strict standards of jurisprudence which Khalkhali was violating left, right, and center. He was violating even Quranic and established traditional principles of law. So you could remove. The same can happen with Khamenei. So there is a great deal of consistency, certainly much more than the Indian judiciary at any rate. Uh, Up to actually, I admire their system. Their system actually makes the Indian judiciary look like a third world judiciary, which it is. But there is a remarkable level of consistency across the board. I think people, for all the cruelty that they see with political this and that, they don't see the kind of compassion and clemency that, not clemency, but compassionate hearings that civil and family courts go through. They don't always work, but more or less, if you talk even to a fully reformist Iranian, burn your bra and go around showing your tits in Tehran kind of thing, they won't have issues with the police and the family courts. Okay. We also need to remember they're way ahead of us. In 1979, their per capita income was higher than South Korea and Taiwan. 1979 eclipsed everything, and South Korea and Taiwan went ahead. Otherwise, Iran today would be a fully industrial state. Okay. Now, there are many reasons why that happened, but that's for a different time. But let's come back to the crash out here.
I
This
also want
war,
to bring up the foreign minister who died in this crash. Not many people are talking about him, but he was the country's top diplomat and was very active on the global stage. In fact, last year brokered a meeting aided by China with the Saudis, which is very significant for the region, for them to come together on the same table and have a conversation. So, how, what does this mean for Iran and its kind of tense relationship with so many countries now that he's gone?
so, we need to remember that this man wasn't particularly experienced by Iranian standards. He had been chosen more for ideological loyalty than he was for any great diplomatic experience. There were much more able diplomats than him. Javad Zarif, for example, was an extremely competent foreign minister who had a huge amount of experience and could very easily, go around running circles around people. Similarly, Manusher Motaki was another really good uh, hardliner. Sure, Kamal Kharazi was the worst of the hardliners, but
Is
they
he the
all
guy
had.
during COVID? Who was the guy during COVID? The foreign minister. He was not
I
very nice.
I forget who it was, but
Yeah.
these
This
guys were
guy is supposedly, this guy was supposedly a protege of Soleimani, the
so
guy who was
he's been
assassinated. Yeah.
chosen exactly. He's been chosen for political reasons.
Hmm.
He is not known to be. The negotiations that he led were all consistently very difficult, and Iranians drive a hard bargain, but you can bargain with them. This wasn't a fellow you could bargain with because he wasn't trusted with enough power. So he was essentially a sent to stall. Okay, so his entire career has gone through without stalling. For stalling, he's been a
Stalling.
face for stalling, not a face for resolving.
Got it.
Okay,
Got it.
resolving happens when, like Jay Shankar, the prime minister trusts you implicitly. He gives you your red lines and he says, now you go and sort it out. And Jay Shankar will see if he can bring it down to his red lines, he'll bring it down to the red lines. If it goes over the red lines, then he will say, okay, time out. Let this be a head of government meeting, and then it gets upgraded to the two heads of government who then finally decide how to tackle it. The problem is, this guy has never realistically, if you go through his negotiation records, he's never actually been given the kind of agency to resolve serious issues. Okay. That said, he has been chosen because he's ideologically extremely loyal. So it's a contradiction. Why would a guy be chosen if he weren't ideologically loyal and at the same time not be given the kind of agency that, say, Jawad Zarif was given? Right? Jawad Zarif is a truly impressive man. If you've met him, you'll know this guy can run rings around you. You know Samir Saran. And every
Yeah.
time Samir has got a lovely sense of humor and things like that. And at the dinner table, he was being his usual mischievous self, trying to get, because we hosted him at ORF, Zarif, uh, trying to get, trying to embarrass him in a very friendly way. And every single time, Zarif would get Samir back, which is quite an achievement. Uh, in a very gentle way, because I remember this thing which it's an Iranian saying, the wit of a gentleman should be like the nibble of a lamb and not like the bite of a dog.
Can you tell that to Sohail?
No,
Okay.
because see, it's
Just
contextual.
checking.
Suhail's humor with regards to you, you deserve.
Okay.
So when he does it to you, when he bites you
This
like a dog,
is
you deserve.
okay.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
right. So that's basically it.
That's the net. So I mean, what's coming out is really that these people are very well known in Iran, but in terms of actual power, they are not that significant. That's why when the supreme leader kind of came out in the very early hours of this information of the crash coming to light, was that there will not be much of a change and everything is under control, and continue to pray and we hope for some good news. And that's really the way to look at it. I don't think there's going to be much of a change. There will be people who will step into the roles that need to be stepped into, and the families, of course, will be mourning and devastated by this loss, no doubt.
So
But then again, very contentious. I mean, Abhijit, this man was called the Butcher of Tehran at one point, I see.
exactly, and he was one of the cohorts of Kolkoli. So thousands upon thousands of people used to be executed every year without proof, just on suspicion, where suspicion would turn to evidence. And it was a nightmare. So, my mama at that time was working for a French company, a French oil company. So I used to go visit him because, I like traveling. And yay, he's in Iran. There are
No,
missiles falling in
your
Tehran.
mother needed you out of the country to get a
Yeah,
break.
that's also true. She was like,
I think
"But
that was more
demise
like
ho,
it.
isko bachche ko, child
I
from
mean, a
hell."
different country, please,
Yeah.
please, I beg
So
you.
I'd go there. Right? And they lived in Shemiran. Uh, Lovely house, had its own swimming pool. In those days, having your own swimming pool was a very big. Even
This is
today, it's a big.
80s, 80s or 90s?
85. I think it was end 85, early 86. And this time, the War of the
That
Cities was in
was,
full
yeah,
swing. Yeah.
yeah.
There were scuds coming in from both sides. And curiously enough, the year after that, he got posted to Baghdad. So, so he spent 4 years in Iran, and then he spent another 2, 3 years in Iraq. And so he got missiles on both sides. But anyway, in Tehran, in the old airport, the new airport is Imam Khomeini. The old one, Mehrabad. I remember when I landed, I was super thrilled. When I got out, it was about a kilometer and a half, almost 2 kilometers drive. I don't remember now anymore. The first roundabout that you see Hmm? One long crane with three people hanging off of it. And you're not prepared for this, right? Because you're like, idhar to, if somebody dies, the child is like protected and you're not allowed to see anything or anyone, and you're sent off to the neighbor's house or whatever, or the aunt's house or whatever, so that you're not in a house of death and whatever. There, that was the first time, and I was like, I remember gawking. I'm like, oh my god, they're dead people. Oh my god, they're hanging. I have this morbid fascination for human sacrifice and execution and all of that. So I was like, how cool is this and whatnot nonsense and all of that. And I remember this very clearly. At that time, I had this camera called it was a Minolta something. It looked exactly like a hot shot. Do you remember the hot shot camera? Yeah. It was a thin little
Love
brick.
them. Yeah, little like this yellow cover. Yeah.
So mine was
Great.
a Minolta that looked exactly like that, but much better. And it used to have those cartridge 24 shot cartridge ones, which looked like this. It wasn't that single one with the film that would stick out that you had to pull out and fix, and then it wasn't like that. It was a full 24 shot cartridge like this, like, two circles with a thing in between that would go into it. And I remember taking out my camera, and my uncle just pushed my hand down because he's like, don't. If they see you taking it, I'll get into trouble. Okay. But once you went there, the parties were insane. There were lots of expats and things like that living out there. Sure, every time there'd be a missile hit or something like that, not hit, nothing hit us. You'd go down underground. But there was also a dark side to it, because when I came back, my uncle, in those days, there were only letters and shit like that, right? So you had to be very careful what you wrote and things. And mostly it'll be him coming back and bringing me back things, because there wasn't a direct flight to Tehran in those days, so he had to take some very long circuitous route to come. But he would bring me stuff and things, and he'd be like, Abhijit, do you remember this guy from this uncle and auntie whose house we went to for dinner? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, they got arrested and they were executed.
Now he's telling
Right?
you this.
Yeah, I mean, he knew I was into politics even in those days, right? So it was like,
And you had a morbid fascination for executions, which you just
yeah. So
admitted to literally 2 minutes ago.
it was very strange how many people in the elite up in Tajrish and Shemiran were actually executed. In fact, if you do a statistical analysis, more people from Tajrish and Shemiran would have been executed, because those were the posh colonies, the sort of Amrita Shergill Marg, Malabar Hills, Boat Club Road in Delhi, Bombay, and Madras, respectively, which were close to the Shah and would have been targeted. But what surprised me was, because most of the executions had been finished off by this time, people were still being executed at that point of time. And it was just scapegoatery. You'll be accused of being a spy. If you did not agree, even under torture, if you did not confess, you would be found guilty because you've been trained to not give up under torture. Had you been innocent, you would have broken under torture. The fact that you did not break under torture shows that you are a trained spy. And if you broke under torture, obviously you're a spy. You yourself have admitted it.
Yeah.
There's no way you can
Fascinating.
get out of shit.
Frightening and fascinating at the same time. But I think we should wrap it up now. And AIM, there's one question for you. If you could quickly answer that, and then we'll say Tata.
Boss, there's no one book or author, boss. Autonomous warfare, autonomous weapons and warfare. I think you should read. Go to the ICRC website. The ICRC has fantastic International Committee of the Red Cross. They have fantastic publications which are very forward looking, that go into all the ethics, the technology, and all of this. So if you're looking for AI and autonomous weapons, there is nothing better than the ICRC website. Go to their publication site and download. But there's a lot to read out there. Okay, so there's no one book, like I said. But for me, the go-to in all the ethics and the dilemmas of this has always been the ICRC with regards to autonomous warfare, because there is a role here. The reason the ICRC takes this so seriously is it's one place. International law is fairly well adjudicated. But when you take away the human in the chain, where does the responsibility for the kill lie? Mm. So that's one of the questions they deal with. And so ICRC, International Committee of the Red Cross.
Okay, and thank you so much, AIM. It's always a pleasure to listen to you on these topics because you just come with a wealth of information and exposure, which is very hard to come by. So I'm really grateful that you spared the time to break it down for us and to make sense of what's happening there in the unbiased, intelligent way that you are capable of but rarely display. So appreciate it.
I have
And
family in Iran, you see, so I'm always pro Iranian in that. Like, look, I mean, with Iran, they're lovely people. I'm not a
yeah, they're
big.
very fashionable people, by the way, and I was interested, like these logs, they were talking to them and they said, which national, you're such a closed country, they were asking young people, which other country do you think Iranians are like? And you know what the country they picked, most of them?
Hmm, Israel.
No,
Hmm.
Italians. They said we're
Really?
like Italians, yeah. And I was surprised, like most of them
I'm
were
not
saying that.
surprised.
I thought maybe they'll say Pakistan, India, I mean, similar language, similar sort of, they were
They
all
they
like
I
Italian.
don't think people realize this. They think of themselves as Europeans because
I think that's the sense I got, yeah.
historically their oldest enmity and their longest enmity was with Rome,
Hmm.
starting from the Greco-Roman world in that sense, starting from the Achaemenid opposition to Persia, sorry, the Achaemenid opposition to Greece, then the Greeks destroying the Achaemenid Empire, and then the Roman Parthian wars and the Roman Sasanian wars and things like that. People don't realize that Rome was more Greek than it was Roman in that sense. Okay, the elite spoke Greek amongst themselves, which is why Greek had to be banned on the floor of the Senate. Most of the Roman elite spoke to themselves in Greek. So when the Eastern Roman Empire declares itself Rome, it surprises no one because it was just going back to its Greek roots in that sense. And when they declared Greek to be the lingua franca and not Latin, even though right till the end both were spoken at court, Latin and Greek, but Greek was the most spoken language, they just saw this as the continuation of a 2000-year-old ceaseless crusade between Rome and Greece. And the surprising thing is, when the Ottomans take over, what is it called? It's called the Sultanate of Rome. They called themselves the Roman Empire. The
They
Sultanate
say
of
we
different.
look also. We think we look like
But
Italians.
The
Yeah.
Sultanate of Rome was slightly different, but they also said, called one of the titles, the official title of the Ottoman Empire was Devlet-e Aliye, the divine state. But the one of the titles of the Ottoman Emperor was always Caesarium, Caesar of Rome. So they saw themselves as Caesar. So even the Ottoman Abbasid wars, which were essentially Turk on Turk struggles, were seen as a fight, a continuation of the 2000-year-old war between the Greco Roman Western Center and the Persian Eastern Center.
Oh, so
Okay.
there's a historical context to why
There's,
they,
there's
in
a
May
2000-year-old
2024,
history.
yeah, they think that they are like most like the Italians. Fascinating, really. History is fascinating. And I believe Prime Minister Modi has declared one day of mourning.
Not the best person to be declaring mourning for, but sure. हमारा क्या
Yeah,
जाता है?
so one of our viewers is saying, hats off to him. What does this say to the US? Wow.
And look, it says nothing to the US. I mean, we don't really care what the US thinks, but it's important to realize that everybody's talking about Chabahar. This is not the first deal we've signed on Chabahar. Okay, we've signed several deals with Chabahar and the Iranians. Every time the Iranians are on the back foot, they come beg us to sign deals on Chabahar and this and that. To date, they have never allowed us the operational autonomy to extend the roads from Chabahar into Afghanistan. Okay, they will never allow us to, because the moment they allow us to play our games in Afghanistan, they realize they won't be able to play what they want to play, or our interests may not align completely. We have been Chabahar kitne bar. I've been hearing about Chabahar for the last 25 years, Advaita. Has anything ever been delivered on Chabahar? Kuch bhi nahi. The moment, they want India when everything else looks bleak. The moment a nuclear deal is signed again, India will get diddly squat. Chabahar will be, so take my word for it. Nothing is going to come out of this latest Chabahar agreement either.
All right. On that optimistic note, we wrap up today, and we'll be back soon. Thank you everybody for watching. Do like, share, subscribe, etc., etc. And we will be back soon. And Lakme, if you want to sponsor Abhijit's makeup, talk to us. We're willing to have formal discussions on this. So thank you.
Lakme and Sabyasachi, please get in touch with us.
Yeah. We want to go Indian. We want to go Bharatiya. Otherwise, there are a lot of options. There's Mac, there's Elizabeth Arden, there's all of that. But we want to go Desi. That's our thing. Yeah. Bye, everyone.